You need this for the recording. I'm the head of the Stanford Geospatial Center here at Stanford University, the third leg of our cartographic collections, the one that collects all of the points, lines, polygons, and pixels, the born digital content, our modern maps. Evan has asked me to introduce the last of our talks today. But before I do that, I want to thank a couple of people. First of all, I want to thank Barry for sponsoring this event. This would not be possible at all without both his sort of existential support and his financial support. So thank you so much. Thank you, as always, to David and Abby for your support of the center and for your generosity just in general to the geo and the map community, as always. Many of you will know that 2 years ago, Evan made his debut here as the head and curator of the David Rumsey Map Center. And I would like to also personally thank Evan for forgiving me for that, because I asked him to show up his first week during this conference, which was probably quite something. The 2 years since has been demonstration after demonstration of just how right we were about bringing Evan here. And ensuring the success of this center. So let's get to this talk. So many rabbit holes in the last 3 days, right? I don't know about y'all, but I've got probably enough tabs open on my Google Chrome browser to shut it down. Some of those include multiple USGS system characterization reports on PlanetScope and other imagery. Thank you, Robert, for suggesting that. Ved's Stanford dissertation is open on my desktop, and I will get through it. The general bathymetric chart of the oceans, GEBCO, which I am playing with in Google Earth Engine, and you can too because it's free. The first view of Earth from space is open on my computer, and I've watched that YouTube video probably 10 or 12 times so far. Finally, there's a first report, the first report in Telegeography's report archive, which contains a report with a series of wonderful Menard-style maps of the imbalance of global communications. These are maps from 1992, a time when many of us remember that only one party on international calls was charged for that call. And these are these beautiful Menard maps of that imbalance. They're fantastic. So our next speakers come from Telegeography, the company that maps the world's digital heartbeat. Gregory Staple founded Telegeography in 1993, turning the hidden highways of global communication into maps we could actually see. He's also been a lawyer, a writer, a clean energy entrepreneur, and now lives a nice, comfortable life in Marble, Colorado. I actually did zoom into Marble, Colorado, and to see, what it looked like in satellite imagery, because that's just what I do. Markus Kristeya started making fantasy maps for Dungeons and Dragons, also guilty of doing that. Rediscovered cartography at Syracuse University and joined Telegeography in 1999. Since then, his designs have appeared everywhere from newsrooms to museums. Together, they'll share Mapping Tomorrow, exploring how our connected world keeps evolving and how maps help us imagine what's next. Please welcome Gregory Staple and Markus Kristeya.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd be remiss not to say thank you to David Rumsey and the Map Center for taking all of our maps that were sitting in our map file cabinets, archiving them all, and giving them a home here in Stanford University. Thank you so much. So for those of you who don't know us, Telegeography specializes in collecting telecom data, and then we wrap this up and sell them as reports and databases to companies like Google, Microsoft, Verizon, the World Bank. So one might wonder, what business does a company like us have at a cartography conference? But as you can see here from this beautiful display case, we actually make pretty good maps. And that's one of the reasons why you have to beg the question, so what is behind this driving force of making maps at Telegeography? So in founding the company, This is how Greg explained it. The old geography of countries and coastlines is giving way to a new geography marked by telephone codes, satellite footprints, and internet addresses. Electronic networks have made the world smaller, but they have also created countless new places, both virtual and physical. This expanding electronic terrain, call it telegeography, demands a new cartography. So just like explorers of yore, the company's mission is to explore, to document, and visualize uncharted territories, in this case, digital ones. And like those adventurers, we use maps to help explain this new landscape. Because we all know maps provide a familiar starting point, a place to orient yourself in an unfamiliar space. And that really works well even with telegeography. So what we do in our cartographic approach is that we layer all this new information that we're finding on top of recognizable physical geography. And in doing so, we think we ground truth this new terrain, and we also visualize and help demystify what telecoms and the information that it carries is all about. And in case it wasn't clear, I made this image with AI because Greg and I look much better in person. So it all started with telephone voice call minutes. When Greg found this data at the FCC, which is the US telecom regulator, this allowed Greg to eventually build the world's first global database of voice call volumes. He recognized that the patterns of these voice calls represented a new type of economy, one that was based on information. And that became the foundation for the telegeography report series, but also the underlying data for our global communications traffic maps. In 1993, that same report started documenting a different type of traffic. These are digital signals between networks that would eventually become what we know today as the internet. At this time, this data was measured in mere megabytes, but eventually this would eclipse all the voice call traffic volumes and become the dominant traffic on the world's networks. Here you see an early 2001 global internet map, which shows the internet capacity deployed between countries. In its first global telecommunications map, which is on this wall as well, it depicts a submarine cable called TAT-8. This was the world's first fiber optic submarine cable to be laid across the Atlantic. The cable consists of fiber optic cables, which allowed it to deliver 40,000 simultaneous phone calls. So that's what we measured it at the time. But this was 10 times more than its predecessor. And this fiber optic technology would continue to improve dramatically over time. So in comparison today, Google's Grace Hopper cable, which was launched in 2022, has a capacity of 352 terabytes. This is 1.2 million times more than the capacity of this cable alone. And the number of cables also increased over time. In that first map, there were less than 30 submarine cables. In our most recent map, released in 2025, there's over 600. This cable map series became our longest running wall maps. And it continues to become the catalog for all of the number of submarine cables that are in the ocean, but we also use it as a medium to tell important stories about this network under the sea. These stories appear as infographics that normally appear at the bottom of the map, and it includes information such as total available submarine cable bandwidth, who owns these cables, how much does it cost to build them, and so on and so forth. But in 2012, this map also included the first time we introduced the idea of network latency. Network latency is the time it takes for a signal to travel across the network and reach its intended destination. What determines latency to large part is actual physical distance. But it is also affected in the network design depending on the network routing rules, the available bandwidth, but also whether or not there's network congestion and so forth. There's a lot of factors that go into designing networks, but reducing latency continues to become a main goal of all network engineers. In our 2014 map, we highlighted a little-known industry that is responsible for laying submarine cables, but also repairing them when those submarine cable breaks. According to most recent data, about 67% of cable breaks are caused by human activity, including accidental anchoring, where anchors are dropped onto submarine cables, but also fishing activities. Then there's about 10% is responsible because of environmental factors such as earthquakes. About 6% can be attributed to equipment failure, and about 18% is unknown. But the biggest takeaway from our submarine cable story is that it happens a lot. According to our data, about 200 submarine cable breaks occur annually between 2010 and 2023. But most of these cable breaks go largely unnoticed by the world. And the reason for this is because of internet routing rules. Because when a cable breaks happen, these rules will redirect traffic to another place, another route path, which creates latency because it's taking a longer way to get around, but this prevents from total outages from happening. And one other reason why it's not noticed is that it can take as few as a couple of days to repair these submarine cable breaks, depending on where the cable breaks occur, as well as the availability of the many cable repair ships that are docked strategically at ports around the world. In 2019, we told a story of a new building boom. And this was driven in large part by content providers. And these are companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta. These companies have huge, huge bandwidth demands. And this has pushed them from simply leasing submarine cable capacity from other cables to actually being co-owners of cables, and in some cases, operators of those cables themselves. And because of these large investments over time, these different actors, these content providers, now operate the largest number of submarine cable bandwidth in the world today. So we've seen all these print maps, and I love making them. And it's fun to design these maps, but there is one problem. These maps basically becomes obsolete before the ink dries because of all these changes that are happening. So to address this problem, in 2011, we decided that we were going to publish all this data and create this online interactive map. And over time, we've had imitators, and they've come and gone, but our map continues to be the definitive map for submarine cable data. And there are many reasons for that, but I think one big reason for its longevity is that we decided to make this data available to the public so that it could be remixed by the press, by research institutions, and other parties. And so by making that decision, it has turned our work from kind of a niche, obscure, basically study, to something that has gained the attention of a much wider audience. And interestingly enough, very recently, perhaps it's because everybody is a bit on edge, in the last 2 years, there have been multiple cable breaks that happen concurrently. And this has spawned a lot of reports and stories and commentary in the press, as well as new pundits that saying that there is a new kind of hybrid warfare happening underneath the ocean. And it's blossomed a bunch of new submarine cable experts, if you want to call it, saying that, look, these submarine cables are very vulnerable. What are we going to do about them? But based on what I've just shared with you about how a number of cable breaks have actually been happening, this is really very much an overreaction. But because of this sudden interest with submarine cable security, what has been happening in spheres outside of telegeography will definitely have a ripple effect on this submarine, this network under the sea. So turning our attention to the internet, when we published our first internet study in 2010, we asked a very basic question. And the question was, what does the internet look like? A lot of people at the time said it looks like a cloud. There was another person that says it's a series of tubes. But in our report, we wrote that it's best described as a collection of hubs and spokes. And this helps explain both what the internet looks like, but also how networks actually work. Because in a network of networks, where there is greater interconnectivity between all these different networks, it becomes incredibly much more valuable to be at that location. And shown here is an example of one of those locations. This is 60 Hudson in New York, one of the original telco buildings and hub of global communications. So network operators, internet service providers, data center people, they all want to connect to places like this because by being a tenant in here, you immediately have access to over 300 other networks that are already connected there. Well, one thing that we didn't know was that our study of this hubs and spoke topology would be eventually used for training spies. So in 2013, a Washington Post report showed our our hubs and spokes diagram in the slide of PRISM, the secret government surveillance program made public by the whistleblower Edward Snowden. And on this slide, our hubs and spokes was referenced as a key idea in understanding how networks are designed and how data flows on this network, as well as suggesting how and where to optimize spying activities. So in many ways, this was the telegeography of cyber surveillance. But back to cartography. We were not the only people that were interested in figuring out creative ways of showing what the internet looks like. And here is one example. Using traceroute data, which records the interconnection within and between networks, the Bell Labs projects documented the growth of the internet as a series of colorful diagrams, and telegeography's sister company, Peacock Maps, helped popularize this project by printing and selling posters of this schematic representation of the internet. In designing our 2012 map, we used that same program to collect our own data of internet connectivity. But we made the conscious decision of showing these paths on familiar geography, in this case, a fuller projection. One could argue that by making this decision, this map becomes much more readable because someone can immediately see where there are dense interconnection points and where there are important hubs along the internet. And one of those hubs is Miami, Florida. Miami, Florida is a conduit for 70% of Latin America's entire internet connectivity. Now that's an important reminder that the design and the shape of the internet is grounded in physical geography. For every hub that serves as a connection point on the internet, there is physical space that needs to be occupied by data centers. For every server in those data centers that perform various compute tasks, there needs to be access to local reliable power sources. And for all those applications that run on those servers, there needs to be both logical as well as physical connection points for other networks to connect to it. So this remains true to this day, but the arrival of AI applications has accelerated these requirements and has started what I'm describing as a continental shift in telegeography. So the first sign of this shift, as identified earlier, was when content providers became owners and operators of submarine cables. So to show how dramatically that has changed, in 2013, they accounted for about 23% of total used submarine cable bandwidth. By 2025, we estimated that these four players account for more than 75% of total available submarine cable bandwidth. And on land, the decisions where these content providers decide to locate their data centers is no longer bound by, let's say, traditional geography, which is finding the place where everybody is connected to. But there's other factors that are now starting coming to play. And here are a few of them. Available physical space, access to reliable energy, especially renewable energy, as well as government incentives. So here are 3 examples of those. Meta has announced to build a massive AI data center called Hyperion. Its footprint is estimated to be the size of Manhattan. So where does a company like this build such a data center? The answer is Richland Parish, Louisiana, population 20,000. So why here? One major reason, the local government has given this project access to a 2,250 acre former farm to locate their data centers. So Meta can build basically a 4 million foot square campus on this location in the next coming years. The second example is Google, which built Hamina, their data center located in the Bay of Finland. What made this location attractive? Here are 2 environmental reasons. First, it's a cooler climate, but second, this location, which was a retrofitted old paper mill, has access to what they refer to as a seawater cooling system, which is essential for controlling the heat of its servers operating in this location. And one final example that I'll share here is AWS, or as most of us know it as Amazon. Amazon or AWS is dropping $10 billion by the end of 2030 for this project in Ohio. So one has to ask, why Ohio? So AWS's original data centers on the East Coast is located in what's called Data Center Alley. This is in Ashburn, Virginia. And it's increasingly getting crowded and packed with other data centers that are there already. And so to meet the demands of their customers, Amazon or AWS had to look elsewhere, and they look further inland. And there was a trifecta of 3 reasons that made them choose this location, which includes access to large tracts of land, a reliable power grid, and data center sales tax exemptions. So these 3 maps from our Cloud and WAN infrastructure report started about 5 years ago, but it begins to hint on this kind of new geography or telegeography that we're seeing emerging. So cloud regions is where those important data centers are located, and these are the data centers that provide access to services from emails to productivity software to specialized databases as well as AI servers. To access those cloud regions, you have to be connected to what they're calling cloud on-ramps. And these cloud on-ramps are located very close to these cloud regions to reduce latency and give people access to the different services that are available on those servers. But more recently, these content providers have been deploying what's called local zones. And these local zones are connection points that are much, much closer to the end users that may be further and further away from these cloud regions. So they're bringing the subset of those services basically to the customer. So in a sense, this is solving one of the biggest issues of network latency, which is distance, because now access to those services are basically at customers' doorsteps. So when we overlay submarine cable ownership on top of this cloud infrastructure, we're beginning to see perhaps what I can refer to now as new hubs and spokes. And these are content providers' global, private, high-performance networks, as well as the footprint of their data centers. And these networks carry an increasingly high percentage of the world's data, and rather than running all of this on the traditional public internet. And curiously enough, these networks design, which is high bandwidth with low latency and massive compute, is super ideal for AI development. So it's clear that the AI ambitions of these companies will continue to reshape both geography and telegeography over time. And while our maps and analysis will have its core audience of hyperscalers, content providers, network engineers, and investors, we believe it has much to offer in terms of a broader conversation point. Because like our analysis of the internet and our submarine cables, these new maps can help identify larger social, cultural, and economic impacts of this emerging digital landscape. And Greg will have more to say about that.
So I think this is on. Can people hear? Yes, good. I want to sort of continue what the discussion of the telegeography of the AI age of the internet. But before doing so, and this is a picture of the Hyperion data center on Manhattan, not much room for anything else, and we'll go back to that. But I want to deal with the social, political, and cultural impacts. I want to answer this question in part, now what, or so what? The reason is that this giant engine that's global that Markus showed in the last set of maps, 4 companies owning the hubs and spokes that drive our global economy, has a contradictory set of forces, 2 dueling stories, as I said. One is that it brings us together, but the other part of that, and the part that I thought has always been underreported when I flagged this in 1993, the power stroke of this machine creates an explosion of place, an explosion of places that has only gotten more dense and more vast as we go along. So on the left side of the slide, when I started telegeography, The Death of Distance was a very popular book. Francis Cairncross wrote for The Economist, and it was a wonderful time. You could click and point your way around the world. Graphical browsers were coming. Email was just becoming on everybody's desktop. Tom Friedman also popularized this. The world is flat. We're all coming together. This still has some currency. Reid Hoffman wrote a book earlier this year that suggests that AI is just a form of informational GPS. It's a kumbaya story. Then there's the other side of these multiplicity of places which tell an entirely different story. Nick Carr flagged this earlier this year and almost echoed 30 years later exactly what I was saying. Bill McKibben put it well. 10,000 claims of contrarianism, equally true. Every counterfactual narrative around can exist in a happy place because you have your own website, your own Instagram feed, your own Facebook. This dynamic continues to exist and exert an enormous influence on how we live. And new places are being created every second. And if you don't have that happy new place, oh my God, it's a ghost story around the campfire. This is from the New Yorker, and a lovely one, which absolutely captured it. Marshall McLuhan actually referred to this too, although obliquely. Many people thought that modern communications would bring people together, solve the problem, instead of creating a new kind of tribalism. Well worth rereading McLuhan, particularly the Gutenberg Galaxy and the Understanding Media. So I created this chart in 1993, which I pulled out just a couple weeks ago again. I think it still resonates. These are the dynamic, the 2 stories that the network is really telling us. We're more compact, but we're also more dispersed. We're more intimate, but also terribly distant. I'm going to go back to this later on. So how do we get here? And where are we going? Well, if you follow this dynamic, and Markus explained the hub and spoke analogy well, And I must say, when I opened, I have to go back, when I opened the Washington Post and saw Ed Snowden's dump of the PRISM slides with the telegeography logo from the NSA, you know, it was, are we vindicated, or whose work are we doing, really? Because we never got paid for that. So anyway, it's a function of hubs and spokes, compute and bandwidth, both of which have grown. And it's largely a bandwidth story, in my view. I don't know the compute side as well, so I'm in the wrong place to discuss that anyway, because there are many experts in the room. So how much is a lot? What's happened? And I think it's startling. It's all a story of fiber optics. And I was moved yesterday by Juno's presentation. If you can lens the cosmos, trillions of stars, and billions of galaxies, well, surely we can find a better way to cross the Atlantic. And that's what we've done. The bandwidth growth since the 1990s is ginormous. Marcus put up the slide with TAT-8, which was the biggest fiber optic cable, the first one to cross the Atlantic, 40,000 phone calls, followed by TAT-10 with a capacity a bit over a gigabit, 160,000 calls roughly. Today, the new cables, one that's almost in service by Meta, 480 terabits per second. 400, it's hard of us, but because there are cosmologists and astrophysicists in the audience, one can grasp large numbers. But I'm going to go forward a slide. That's 3.4 billion Zoom calls on one cable. And all of this capacity has occurred very quick. This is a chart from The Economist that the telegeography helped create. And you can see when the social media services started, the capacity to port that service around the world, which is crucial to Facebook and Google and Amazon today, was extremely limited. We're talking less than 10 terabytes globally. Even when Facebook reaches 250 million customers, we're talking of 40 terabytes worldwide, a fraction of what one cable can do. So this world we're living in is something entirely unaccustomed to having. The technology has completely outstripped our ability socially, politically, culturally to deal with it, in my view. And it's happened so rapidly. So we'll go on to this because the other side of this is users, right? The internet grew from an academic exercise between a few nodes. Marcus put up an early slide from that to a couple 100 million to now 5 billion plus and growing. And globally, the bulk of users are, the great bulk of users are outside North America, hence cables. This shows it roughly. It's hard. I couldn't find a particularly good graph of this. And capacity. We're talking about 800 terabytes now of Atlantic capacity. And remember back, not 15 years ago, 10% of that. So, is it possible we could have too much bandwidth? Now, I want to be clear. I'm all for VED and JUNET to port terabyte data sets, petabyte data sets for research purposes around the world. But as we know, this is the aphorism, the dose makes the poison. I like an espresso as much as the next guy, right? But, at some point, you can overconsume, and it depends how you use this bandwidth. Bandwidth per se is not the devil. Carpet bombing social media at 14-year-old adolescents is poisonous. None of this would happen without a gigantic leap in bandwidth that allows billions of people simultaneously to get these social media. And we have traditionally separated our criticism or our analysis, shall I say, of the application layer from the physical layer. Both matter. And that's what I wanted to underscore here. Okay, so back to ground truthing the internet in the age of AI. Yogi Berra is the best compass I know. If you don't know where you are, you may not know where you're going. So, I wanted to know where I am. So ask ChatGPT, right? Where am I? I've been asking ChatGPT for about a year. ChatGPT 4 was pretty bad. It said, well, I'm someplace in a data center, it's decentralized, la-di-da. ChatGPT 5 is pretty good about this. The answer is it depends. What are we talking about? Where it's developed, where it's hosted, and how it runs. So I said, yeah, you got it right. So would you say that hosting and delivery of AI involves a massive, decentralized global construction project? Yes, that's exactly what's going on. Unprecedented, a couple $1 trillion spread over maybe 5 or 10 years. And Markus adverted to this and showed the nascent data centers being constructed by 3 of the big tech companies. New York Times got this. There was an op-ed by Kate Crawford and some other people trying to underscore this. So why is this important? If you don't know where we are, not only do we not know where we're going, but there's no sense of agency, of oversight, of control. And I'm going to say more about that in a moment. Okay, so let's go a little bit into the weeds here, because it's the next series of really probably reports and maps from telegeography. And I want to say, I'm speaking in my personal capacity here. I no longer work for telegeography. I'm not associated with the company, and Markus and I have been trying to work at a joint presentation here, but I'm speaking for myself. Okay, so depends where the training data is, where the clusters are, and then when you make a prompt, where the inference clusters are that serve it. And let's see, is this working? Okay, here we go. So this is a work in progress. Will it create a new series of hubs and spokes? A lot of it does depend upon latency, the pattern of users, and I'm going to show some information on that. We don't yet know. And what I've flagged here is some of the factors that may influence the construction of new cable systems and where they go. I think a lot is going to depend upon energy, water, land use, availability, and oversight of that. And it will also depend upon how these models play out. And I think the balance, importantly, between models that mainly are providing words in response to prompts and those that are providing audio and video information, which have different requirements really in compute. One thing is worth underscoring, which telegeography this, I'm thanking Alan Malden from telegeography for this set of slides. Cable expenditures, though large, and the new Waterworth cable, which I'll flag that Meta has proposed around the world is $10 billion. It's very little in comparison to the CapEx budgets being spent on AI, which Google underscored. This is the Meta Ajana cable, which is, I think, will be in service next year, and Project Waterworth, which is announced in February. No applications filed yet, and we'll still see how that plays out. And what I've begun to flag here is this is where we are, and I've hinted at where we're going, and there is a potential for oversight. You require landing licenses on both ends of the cables, plus you can oversee data center construction, and people are moving out of Northern Virginia because the Virginia legislature has said, hey, wait a minute, electricity prices are going up, we're concerned about agricultural lands, and your data center is not as welcome today as it was 10 years ago. So there is oversight, and I think the maps that we're producing can provide a guide to the touch points for agency for all of us. So that was the Waterworth cable. This is from a different cable source. The maps are substandard in my view, but it did show the collection of cables proposed and pending in September. To reprise the cables that exist, and it's worth underscoring, we're talking about 4 companies, vertically integrated, apps, data centers, cables, controlling about 75% plus globally. This is not the US, this is global internet traffic content. Why? Because Google has expanded. How popular is it worldwide? This is Instagram and Facebook. users. Asia is writ large, so does Latin America growing, particularly Brazil. Okay, so what about AI? Very hard to get data out of OpenAI about the Meta footprint in terms of users. This is the best I could find from August, roughly 800 million users on a monthly basis. The US is at 16% of that, Canada another 5%. So already you're beginning to see the replication of the global user community that Facebook or Google has with its browsers, Chrome. Let me go back to this. So what about the limits on long haul? Well, latency, which is well worth flagging, because when you put in a prompt, particularly if you're doing video, imaging, you want to have a workstation that is seamless, that appears that it's next door with the data sets. How much can be put on device? Open question. Data sovereignty matters. We're going to have, since training data will be localized in the end, countries will, as they do today, if you're a user in Belgium or if you're a user in Malaysia, that country will want to be sure that if Google or Facebook or Amazon gathers data, they'll want to have a data set in country. So that's kind of important and may lead to more localization. There are also legal factors, cultural. Whose property is it anyway? And of course, what about the impact on energy and water and kids on the internet? Today, cable owners have gotten a free pass. It's sort of like a superhighway where nobody cares about what trucks transit it, whether you're carrying a load of vegetables from California to the East Coast or radioactive waste that has to be stored someplace in casks. No questions are asked. Cable landing licenses in the United States, the powers that be, which is the Federal Communication Commission and a group of other agencies, including Justice, State Department, and Department of Justice, are mainly concerned about criminal access to cables, about cybersecurity, terribly important, and keeping data onshore when cables may be owned by various companies or foreign entities. Fair enough. Any concern about what goes through the cables? No. Any concern about the linked businesses of companies, data centers, content? No. This is all very timely because last year under the Biden administration, the FCC, it hadn't done so for 20 years, started a comprehensive review of the rules and regs to govern the grant of cable landing licenses. Completed it in August. Mainly what happened was they kicked China out and other adverse nations. No interconnection between Chinese and US-owned cables, no Chinese components in any cable or landing station. And they started a further rulemaking with asking some questions. And the rulemaking has not yet been published in the Federal Register. I just came from Washington. Our occupied city has a government that's been shut down, as some of you know, so no Federal Register publication, so we don't know when comments are actually going to be due. But should we prioritize cables that advance the US AI stack? Good question. Should we? Is the AI stack trustworthy? Do we want it adopted worldwide? You may know that President Trump issued 2 executive orders in the summer to advance US goals in AI. The FCC's report echoes that. Other questions that might be asked of regulators, and I stress that it's not only the US that's on the spot, or the FCC, it's every country that lands, cables, grants, permits. Should the questions be asked that go beyond the marine authorities or those that have typically been tasked with managing cable landing permits? If companies are pirating the world's intellectual works, do you want to grant them fatter pipes to do more of it? Or should we work out what the arrangements should be for fairly compensating authors, including people in this room? What about antitrust? Do we want competition for AI models? If OpenAI through Microsoft, which uses the Azure network, controls the distribution of ChatGPT models and its successors, what about open source LLMs? How are they going to get access? On what terms? And can they compete? These are vertically integrated oligopolies, folks. The EU and the United States courts have said as much. So I think these questions need to be raised. I don't have the answers, but I don't think in this day and age we should give cable owners a blank check. I would like to think we should demand more, not only of these companies, but of our government. So here are some potential conditions that might be attached. No piracy, please. Disclose training materials. Where are the data centers? You guys know. That provides another point of contact for oversight. And comply with local laws. Be a good citizen. And yes, local user data should be in country. Let me go back to the first subject, because I was really moved by the opening presentation by Betsy about the work that Marie Tharp did and how the telecoms industry, which I didn't know, contributed to the birth of plate tectonics, continental drift. Now it's a fact. I know it's a fact because it's on Peter's globes. Plate tectonics. We know there's a mid-Atlantic rift and continents are moving apart. Telecoms always tries to bring things together, right? We know this because of the deep sea sounding that occurred when, I'll go back to the prior slide, not everybody may know, when the cables broke in the late 1950s due to volcanic activity. ATT brought in the Lamont group with Marie Tharp to figure out what the better route might be and get a better view of what's under the ocean. So that successive cables, including the ones I pointed to, TAT8 and TAT10, wouldn't break as much. What about today? As you know, we've really, with these new telecom systems, created a series of new digital plates, digital continents. They're not all continent size, but they're digital spaces. And the more we build, the less satisfactory social and cultural life seems to be, at least in some countries. So let's think about this for a moment. Don't think we're ever going to stop continental drift at a geophysical level. That's a pretty heavy lift. We don't have the technology for that. But I do think we have a handle in oversight of the technology that's involved both in creating these digital plates and in ensuring that some of them interconnect, that they mesh rather than drive us further apart. I have another analogy. As some of you know, I'm an aspiring, enthusiastic amateur botanist. And this summer I came across a marvelous volume. I highly recommend it. Luke Keogh is an Australian historian. And this book is a history of the Wardian case. There's also a map, which is why I wanted to showcase it. The Wardian case was an invention by a doctor in England in the 1840s, Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward. They're called Wardian cases because importing and exporting plants at the time on sailing ships was very difficult. They were kept on deck often, salt spray got in, they were ruined. So this was think of a mini greenhouse with glass, A-shaped sides that kept the moisture out and a lot of moisture in. And the hub here is Kew Gardens. Kew was responsible for getting plants in from explorers around the world and exporting them. If you like chocolate, if you drink coffee, cacao, coffee beans, Kew was responsible, and thank the Wardian case. They were shipped around the world to colonies, to plantations, to scale. And it was enormous benefits. If you're a gardener, and you like magnolias or fuchsias, they all came from exotic lands to England and to the Americas. This map shows the import and export of Wardian cases, about 630 in the 1840s and 50s to 1865. It's marvelous. I thank Luke for the database for mapping it. But along came, with these Wardian cases, in the rootstock and stems, came pests and fungus. And eventually we learned to have a new environmental ethic to protect our biodiversity and conservation. I think this is worth considering when it comes not to shipping plants around the world, but to shipping bits around the world. Thanks much. You've been a wonderful audience.
Questions?
You talk a lot about submarine cables, but not land cables, and I'm curious as to why not.
Markus can speak to this too. The answer is it's a much, the lift is much heavier. Early issues of Telegeography and the first hubs and spokes internet book that I wrote with telecom journalist Ken Cukier, who now is technology editor for The Economist, did that. But once we got much beyond 2000, it became, I think the early 2004, 5, 6, 7 reports had that. And what often was showed was not simply the physical route, but the virtual route, how much bandwidth existed, where the telehouses were. So Markus may have more thoughts.
No, yeah, that's exactly right. It's very difficult. We attempted this at one point to digitize metropolitan area networks, is what it was referred to at the time, where we received these maps from Verizon, from AT&T, that we attempt to digitize and try to scan all of them. But it was a massive lift for a company of 5 people. And so we had to abandon that very quickly. So we relied on, like Greg said, other ways of describing what's in between those locations. And we relied mostly on the internet, the internet bandwidth that's being activated as a proxy for how much capacity is available on those routes on land.
I was curious about some of the earlier maps that were shown. Why are there so few routes between Latin America and Africa, and how did those two continents, talk to each other, and what's the latency like between them?
Well, the short answer is in the 1990s and early 2000s, for sure, and later, satellite, Intelsat, and to a lesser extent, Inmarsat, which handled marine traffic, provided the connectivity, particularly for Africa. The Africa 2 cable didn't come into service until, I don't know, 7, 8 years, 10 years ago. That provided huge capacity around the western part of the continent. There simply, what happened was, I think, traffic transited through the Suez, basically, through the Red Sea to North Africa, and then it was domestic networks. But I don't know about the interconnection. It was very limited. The same South America. The demand, because the main demand for cables was business, private lines, financial services, and that influenced. My part complimented Markus because the customers for telegeography were telecom companies, investors, engineers, people who were planning route diversity or wanted to have a sense of bandwidth costs. Telephone traffic just wasn't profitable enough in those to drive a lot of cable construction in those areas.
Since we are in a above and below conference, you have shown a massive infrastructure that is needed for communications terrestrially. What is the role of space? Is that just a blame Starlink or one of those things?
Well, we used the early maps up until 2003-4 showed the geostationary satellites that were responsible for a significant part of voice traffic at the time, particularly to countries not connected by cables, which was the majority of South America and Africa and parts of the Pacific. But the capacity of cables with fiber optics coming in the early 2000s dwarfed that, and people started building out. So today, I mean, SpaceLink might have a capacity now, I think, of 5-6 million customers. They think they'll have 30-40 million with, they're adding satellites. That's trivial compared to 5 billion internet users. So for remote areas, it's great. I mean, I'm a hiker in Colorado, you're from Colorado too. It's great to have a Garmin device that will use some satellite connectivity, but for large data sets, Ved can't send his petabyte data set by satellite. Even though he's in Guam, you know, he's in Guam and it's cables. That's a hub. Yeah, or Antarctica. So just not that important.
Thank you. Fascinating presentation. What I was interested in is originally when the internet unrolled, it was kind of sold as a real defense measure, because if one cable or whatever, resiliency, if something went down, it was a network, they'd work around it, around the damaged part. And what I was wondering is, with these content providers having their own private networks, is there an impact on resiliency?
Beyond my, Markus, thoughts?
Well, and speaking privately, not for telegeography, I am a bit concerned how these private networks is drawing traffic away from the public internet. They obviously have interest in building these networks and infrastructure for their own specific needs, which is serving their customers and their interests. And so what's going to happen to the public internet and what traffic continues to travel on that? I mean, the technology is still the same. TCP, it's the same thing, whether it's on the private network versus the public internet. So there is that kind of resiliency that you were saying, but it is definitely the build out of these content providers is creating kind of a separate kind of ecosystem of their own that they're focused on, rather than being part of kind of the broader public internet.
I have a question in the back here. I would love to hear Markus talk a bit about the decisions, the design decisions that you've made in the cartography, because there's such variety in these, and then you've sort of approached, I mean, what we can see in the case over here are several examples of the same kind of information being displayed in pretty different ways from year to year. And I'm curious to hear how those decisions were made and how that came about.
Thank you for noticing. At the very beginning, definitely our designs were much more functional. But then I hired a really great designer. So I had all these ideas in the back of my head for a long, long time since I joined telegeography, but I just could not make it happen because I didn't have the skill sets to do that. And so when I partnered with him, he not only was this person I hired a really good designer who had the same aesthetic as me, he was also a programmer. And so we were able to quickly experiment with different ideas very quickly because of most of it being written in software. So with our combined ideas and skill sets, every year we try to come up with a new theme. Otherwise, the maps will always look the same and no one would have particular interest in all of them. So I think we hit the jackpot the first time was in the 2013 submarine cable map. That's the very first map that I thought, if we juxtapose this modern technology with an old style map design, it's going to resonate in a much different way than something that's more schematic that looks like a network. And it did blow up. It was the first of our maps that we had to print another second run because the media picked it up. Everybody was talking about this map. And so we printed a second run for that particular map. But yeah, it's challenging. Every year I have to come up with a new idea, and I haven't quite run out of ideas, but I still have a few more up my sleeve. So hopefully by December, we'll print the 2026 map, and I'll definitely send one here to the Map Center to archive. And I hope you'll like that map when you see it.
Okay, I think this is our last question.
I know we're near the end, but I want to thank you so much. You know, one of the things that strikes me about what you're doing is holding, you know, these cable companies, et cetera, to account. And what I'm thinking about, and the work that we do in libraries, is to actually make sure that that accountability is available for the public, you know, in perpetuity, or, you know, till death us come. But I'm wondering, what is it that you anticipate you will not be able to map and provide information for? You're talking about these private monopolies, essentially, and I'm wondering what it is that you will not be able to reflect in your maps in the future that we should be aware of.
Well, it's a great question. When I was preparing for this, I said to Marcus and somebody else, hey, let's do a trace route. I want to know, because my query prompt to ChatGPT didn't provide an adequate answer for me, although it's great to know it's a global construction project, but I want to know at the physical level where the hops are, much as the first whole internet map was based upon a trace route. And it stops at the edge of the cloud. So we really don't know how these, unless you're inside, and they're proprietary networks, how traffic is being routed anymore. It's become a black hole, as it were. So that's a problem for me to understand. And it's a problem for the security folks too, who are trying to home data and want access. And I think also it's hard to know at the same time, therefore, what the real flows are like, what demand and supply is like, because it goes to a cloud and it's privately held. So the data available to telegeography is getting less and less. I started the company based upon largely publicly available data, but we did a lot of swaps. We talked to companies and we'd swap data because data was published on phone calls and telex traffic and cable capacity too, in arrears. And it was closely held. And many governments, the FCC, blessed at the time, was quite transparent because it required the carriers to report annually on their volumes of traffic to 70 plus countries. That doesn't exist anymore for the traffic that matters. Mark,
Basically what Greg said. I mean, there's the decisions made within these content providers networks is completely opaque to us. I tried a few things earlier, and there are even some servers within the networks that are designed so it disabled any requests from these traceroute data. You just can't ping them. And so yes, that does create gaps in our understanding of it. I mean, we still fortunately can see the physical impact that they have on the world and where they choose to locate their data centers, what cables they build. You can't hide that, but everything else around what's happening inside their network will become increasingly more difficult to understand what's going on.
Yeah. Turn this off.
So I'm gonna keep this brief. Thank you, Greg and Marcus. We're at the end of our 3-day conference. It's my responsibility now to give us our closing remarks, which I'm gonna keep brief because I know we're over time. It's Friday. You all may need to leave, and I won't be offended if you do at this point. I just want to say it's been such a fun couple of days. I have been just so overjoyed watching all of the conversations around me, the connections being made. I've enjoyed seeing friends and colleagues that I haven't seen in a while, and making new friends and colleagues. I was reflecting on the theme just a little bit ago, above and below, and I feel like we've done a really good job of bringing in a mixture of people, of presentations. We've had scientists, humanists, historians, technologists, data visualizers. It's been a really healthy mixture. It's been very diverse. Karin Wigan, who's a professor in history here, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you made a comment last Ruderman conference about bringing people together who both think about maps and who make maps, and I think we did a really good job of that again this time. Rob Simon, one of our presenters, you were the first one to come in. You came early, looked over at the wall, and you noticed the juxtaposition of your above content in the exhibition right by Laura's below, and I think I've had conversations with people about that and how we've embraced it, and I think we've done a really good job of that as well. But it's not just about those two topics being juxtaposed. I think they resonate with one another, and it's sort of a reflection of how we perceive space, time, and place. And each talk, very different from one another, but they all echo that same underlying concept about how we have this relationship with our Earth and all of its surroundings. One of the highlights today was our field trip. Some of you were there. I don't think, I've seen so many people overjoyed in a collection of material related to this conference. This is the first time we did a field trip, and I couldn't even look at the material because it was more fun for me to just take a step back and watch people enjoy. I think Juna may have almost fainted when she saw Galileo's work in the room, and Angel, literally a kid in a candy store. That was just, it's something that, for me, somebody who works in collections, and maybe others in this room who work with collections, we don't, it's just so rewarding to see people get so excited about the material that we have in the libraries. And I just want to do a couple of thanks again. Barry Ruderman and Alex Clausen, obviously we would not be here without you guys for sponsoring this conference and bringing all these wonderful speakers here. David and Abby Rumsey, who envision this space being a center, not just a collection, not just a staff, not just a space, but a center. And I think this is how it becomes that, bringing all these people together, having a good time, making connections, enjoying collections, and talking with one another. And I'm going to leave it right there. Thank you again. There's already topics bubbling up for the next Ruderman conference. We haven't decided on it yet, but it will come up soon. You can hear more about it in our newsletter when we announce it. And I hope to see you all there. Thank you for coming. Enjoy your weekends. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.